Hi and welcome back to Practical Inclusion for another week. A really important week this week, and it is NAIDOC week. I'm hoping that all of you are taking the opportunity to learn as much as you can this week, because if nothing else, this week is an excellent opportunity to attend the plethora of high quality sessions that are around to really raise our education and knowledge around the traditional ownership of this land and the challenges and barriers that are still constantly faced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia currently. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which I broadcast from today, and that's the lands of the Wadawurrung people. Pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that are watching us live today or click on to YouTube and watch this on the replay. My guest today is Riley. Riley, where are you coming? Whose lands are you on today?
Oh, I'm on the lands of the Wadawurrung people and the Kulin Nations. So that's also known as Preston. Yes.
Beautiful, thank you. And we might as well jump in, Riley, and learn a bit about yourself. I think the first time, and I'm not entirely sure, but I think the first time we met was in a stuffy meeting room at Deakin Downtown, perhaps. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. But I was very impressed with your contributions to that meeting immediately, and I've certainly watched your career and the things that you've been doing across the LinkedIn platform, but also with my involvement in the higher education sector. If you could perhaps tell us a little bit about your story, how you got into doing the work that you do, and what work are you doing? What are the things you're involved in at the moment that have something to do with inclusion?
Yeah, I think I kind of fell into it, but I think I just found myself in the work that I'm doing now. So I'm a diversity and inclusion advisor at RMIT University, so primarily supporting our LGBTQ students with personalised support. And then I'm also president of Climbing Cuties, which is an LGBTQ rock climbing club. And then I have a few other things here and there as well. But I mean, funnily enough, I started studying film and, wasn't really sure. I was in the arts for a little bit, but I've always been passionate about supporting the LGBT community, and started climbing maybe 5 years ago. And I think that's where it kind of all started coming together. And now it's something I live and breathe, and I really enjoy that.
Excellent. And what type of, like, your diversity inclusion advisor, what type of work are you doing in that role?
So it goes from anywhere from like personalized individual support for the students if they get in touch with me, for example, to affirm their gender and they weren't sure how to take those steps, through to initiatives and programs, so celebrating days of significance, or maybe supporting staff with allied training. We might identify a key issue, so whether it's to support the transgender diverse community specifically, and then looking at how we can do that. So anything to do with LGBTQ inclusion at RMIT, I'll probably be involved in somewhere, or if there's a rainbow, I'll be nearby.
Sounds like the ideal job for a lot of our listeners, I'm sure. I'm sure it comes with a lot of challenges too, though. Maybe you can tell us, I'm going to jump down to a question that we talked about that we might talk about a bit later, but let's talk about it now, is around RMIT has obviously received some wonderful accolades from AY, the Australian Workplace Equality Index, particularly around trans and gender diverse, or the support of trans and gender diverse people. What do you see, though, even in that organisation at this point in time, what are still the challenges for your staff and students?
I mean, yeah, I'm so proud of what we've been able to achieve, and I can't take credit at all. It has to be the Ally Network, the staff, DGSS network. So DGSS is our acronym for LGBTQ. Just all the staff and student community at the university that's kind of been on this journey with me throughout the last few years. But there's always more work to do, obviously, and I think that it's a bit of a difficult question to say. I'm not sure exactly what the remaining challenges are, because it kind of implies that there's a few things left to do and then it'll be done. I think that it'll kind of be ongoing. But generally moving forward, I'd really like to see businesses and organisations and institutions like RMIT sort of looking at embedding trans and gender diverse inclusion within the core of the work that they do. So, you know, often we find ourselves, and this goes with the other work that I do outside of the university as well, creating support programs and initiatives for the issues that exist also when a trans and gender diverse person feels excluded. Whereas, like, I don't think we take enough time to take a step back and look at where the problem's coming from and really tackling the existing systems. So what's the inherent system that exists that causes that issue, and how can we fix that so that no one feels excluded down the line, I guess.
That's a really good point, and something that we spend a lot of time, well, I certainly spend a lot of time talking about around gender equity, but perhaps we don't articulate that enough in the LGBTI space.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the systems and processes at the moment, so many of them are built by a very specific type of person, probably a cis white straight man, and so you know, it's probably natural that down the line someone's going to feel excluded, whether it's a person of color or whether it's someone who's trans or gender diverse or someone with a disability. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to fix the solutions on the ground. If we could just take a few steps back and say, okay, well, how can we create a system and a process that is inherently has these people in mind? But that's such a huge task. I know that that's like an ongoing thing, but I think it's a good reminder to say, okay, can we do that at this stage? Okay, not right now. Can we do it at a later stage? And just reminding ourselves of that bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just literally yesterday developing up a session that I'm delivering to a women's circus on Saturday, and it was around leadership and governance and inclusive leadership and inclusive governance. And the theme that just keeps coming up is the need to have diverse people in the decision-making point, right? And we sometimes simplify that to just ensuring that there's gender diversity on a board or some form of diversity on the board, but it doesn't have to be that way, does it, to get those voices heard and involved in the decision-making process?
Yeah, I mean, ideally we have a seat at the table from the beginning so that then we can spend our time celebrating and elevating these diverse voices rather than supporting them because they felt excluded or unheard or unseen. And yeah, I guess, you know, their identity in itself shouldn't be the thing that triggers work. It should be, oh, you know, we've got a program or whatever it is with all these people in mind, not, you know, having to fix it because of these people in mind.
Yeah, and that just makes so much more business sense anyway, as well as
probably a lot less work for everyone down the track.
and a lot less money. Think of the initiatives that, you know, organisations and governments spend money having to introduce because of those systemic issues that are clear that weren't addressed at the start.
Yeah, but I like you said, I think if we can just involve more voices from the beginning, because often it's not intentional, you know, it's just that they might not see the barriers that other people with multiple sort of intersecting identities might have in accessing whatever it is they have to offer.
Yeah, and you've raised another point that triggered from a conversation I had yesterday as well about somebody who felt a little bit uncomfortable putting themselves in the shoes and trying to predict the challenges that somebody who was LGBTIQ might face. And I'll be interested in your thoughts, because my response to them was, yes, ideally all the time you have the voices at the table and you work off somebody's direct lived experience. But there's also that line where it shouldn't always be the work of people who are LGBTI or have a disability, and that it is important that we'll educate ourselves as to how to recognise those barriers that we might not see otherwise.
I mean, there's definitely advocates out there like you and myself who love talking about this stuff, and others who, you know, would love to do the work. But then there's other people who, you know, it can be a really big burnout if they're like the token LGBTQ person and they're constantly put on the line or constantly asked to speak or, you know, volunteer at this and that or whatever it is, even if it is a paid role. So finding that balance is super important. And yeah, hopefully people can take the time to do their own sort of privilege check and do their own sort of self-locating and look at where they are, look at what sort of programs and opportunities they take for granted, and then trying to break down maybe the multiple barriers that other people face in getting the same sort of access, which is hard to do. You know, it's not possible to imagine. I can't imagine like a lot of so, like if I talk about the climbing community and the LGBTQ climbing club, I talk about the challenges that trans and gender diverse people face in accessing the sport. And someone who's been so easily welcomed into the sport because they have the money, the time, the support, and the invitation to come climbing, they can't imagine that someone who's trans or gender diverse may feel unwelcome, may feel underrepresented, may be wearing a binder, and so they're physically uncomfortable in the space if they're not, if it's not a visibly trans inclusive space. They they might not feel comfortable in the exercise wear. So there's so many things that one person might take for granted and just can't possibly imagine without hearing about those experiences.
Yeah, really good point. And that segues us quite nicely into the next questions around climbing cuties. Could you perhaps first just explain, I guess, the origins of climbing cuties and what it is?
So climbing cuties with a QTS at the end just means I can call everyone a cutie. Is an LGBTQ rock climbing club. We've been around for about 3 years now. We're based in Naarm, but we do have we are hosting events in Sydney as well now. And it's really a social club, but also an advocacy group. We run meetups indoors. We provide opportunities for people to learn climbing skills and become adventurers in their own right. And then we also support people working in the climbing space, so climbing gyms and professionals to create inclusive spaces or run more inclusive programs for the LGBT community. And of course, going outdoors is a big one. So we try and take people outdoors, an opportunity to connect with the outdoors as well. Yeah.
And how did that all come about? How did your involvement in that come about?
I went climbing at the gym with a friend, and we both were chatting about our identity as queer people in climbing space, and we thought, wouldn't it be nice if there was a queer climbing group? And I think some sort of like groups did exist, but nothing formal, nothing really organized. And I was like, I'm sure there's other queer people in the climbing community. I just don't know who they are. And now there's, like 700 people in the Facebook group. So there's a lot of us. So yeah, we started running little meetups at the gyms and then have grown to have like a membership program and run outdoor workshops and sort of bigger. We've hosted like a multi-day camp as well. So it's grown quite rapidly over the last few years.
It's just such an incredible initiative to have grown that big. Like, who would have thought there were 700 people climbing who were queer?
I mean, allies have always been a part of the story for us. It's never been an exclusively LGBTQ club. So, cis or straight people are and have always been welcome to come along and attend and participate. And we've done that actively because we recognize that we need allies on board because it's not about creating an exclusive space, but it's about bringing everyone along on this journey towards like a different sort of community that we want to foster. So a community that's more inclusive and more welcoming to everyone. So I think that's why we've sort of been able to have everyone on board. It's not everyone feels like they can come along to the events. Sure, there might be a few where there might be limited places, in which case we just make it explicit that we ask people to consider, again, their own privilege and think about what they can give to other people. And in most cases, those spots are filled by LGBTQ people. So yeah, I think that's definitely helped in terms of the growth of the community.
And that's just, it is such an inclusive approach, isn't it? To welcome everybody in, but make sure that you do hold that space for queer people, that this is safe and you're welcome and you're prioritised here.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about where you see or why you believe there is a need for queer, and it's obviously not exclusive, but queer-focused sport and rec clubs?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sport and rec specifically, there's so many benefits we get out of sport. It's not just like good for our mental health and well-being and our physical health as well. And it builds community, and that should be accessible to everyone, but it's not at the moment. A lot of people who are LGBTQ and in particular trans and gender diverse stop participating in sport at a very young age. And so identifying why that might be the case, there's obviously a need for LGBTQ spaces. I think until jobs like yours and mine don't exist, we have to keep creating queer spaces and like keep trying to push this, I guess, getting the bigger communities to realize where there might be gaps where people aren't participating, because participation is really like what we're most interested in. I don't really care if someone comes to climbing Cuties and then doesn't come again, as long as they've had that good time and then they've kind of see themselves as active and sporty people, and then maybe they go off and play tennis, or maybe they go play rugby, or whatever it is, they go into cycling. It's just that sort of like stepping stone into loving themselves, trusting their bodies, maybe feeling affirmed in the body and their identity there, and feeling seen within the sporting sort of space. And then what they do in that is really up to them. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, so the importance of queer spaces, like, so important, I think. And yeah, normalizing the acceptance of LGBTQ people in sports, because at the moment we know it's still very dominated by specific identities. So it's just about doing that, really.
And what do you say to people who will kind of maybe disagree a bit and say that there is much more value placed in our time and effort in making existing sporting structures and recreation structures and clubs and systems inclusive than creating queer specific spaces? What's your response to that?
I think it's a good balance of both, to be honest, because we do a bit of both. We create those queer spaces within the climbing gyms. So we might host events outside of business hours that are Climbing Cuties events, but then we also work with the gym to see what they can do within their existing processes, like training their staff with ally training, and then helping them create their own sort of visibility items, whether it's like rainbow pride merch that they might sell, or just looking at their systems and processes to see how they can be more inclusive. So a nice balance of both things. But if there's people that ask me why Climbing Cuties exists, it's often because they don't, they haven't had an opportunity to realize how easily climbing has been, come into their life, and they don't really recognize that it's really expensive as well. They have, maybe they've got a job and they have the time to go away on the weekends. They've got all these, the doors have always been open to them to access climbing. For others, it's not the same. Yeah.
And we know that definitely translates across sporting spheres and sectors. And I know that's a big conversation, not just for queer people, but for people who are culturally diverse, people with disability, how they get access
to sure.
traditional sporting opportunities that have formed such a strong part of recent Australian culture. I guess I often think around, and I had conversations around the need for queer spaces when I was working at Deakin, and particularly around, we translate this into the workplace, and we think quite often in universities there'll be queer rooms. In the past and currently too, there's also been women's rooms, and there's always been quite heavy debate around the need for that. And certainly there was strong opposition to having queer spaces because of that argument that there's no need for that. We're creating an environment that is inclusive for everyone everywhere, and we shouldn't have segregated spaces for people, and we're just actually amplifying segregation and othering. And initially I think I kind of bought into that argument, but with more research and more time and more discussions, I realised that that's completely untrue. And we're not at, that would be wonderful, right? But we're not at utopia yet. And
no. And until we are, I think we need to keep doing what we're doing, because, yeah, sure, ideally, we just live in a world that isn't hetero and cis normative, but it is. So until that's not the norm, I think we have to keep creating these safe spaces, keep providing opportunities for the LGBT community and other oppressed groups as well, and ensure that they are seen and heard and have a seat at the table. But until then, yeah, that needs to happen. It's just, again, I think it's another reminder that a lot of people don't realize how hetero and cis normative the world is, and how challenging that can be for some people on a daily basis.
I think you've nailed it there. I just want to call out to those who are watching live. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them on the screen, and we can address them. I think you have nailed it. And I often talk to, I'm speaking a lot to local cricket clubs at the moment, and particularly around the trans and gender diverse guidelines that were released by Cricket Australia, along with a bunch of other sporting codes at the same time. And I'm saying to committee members, if somebody who was trans or gender diverse walked into your cricket club tomorrow, what is their experience? And I don't think, I think in the majority of clubs, there wouldn't be necessarily a positive experience for that person. And I think it is on us as club members to make sure that we do what we can to be proactive about this, because it's almost hopefully the inevitable. We hope that these kind of initiatives from these big sporting codes will really bring more trans and gender diverse people to our traditional sporting clubs. But if they get there and their experience is awful, it's not going to bring us forward. It's going to send us back a long way. What advice would you have, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but what advice would you have for clubs that are in this space that are sitting there going, well, yeah, actually, what would we do?
Oh, I definitely tackle it from multiple spaces. I'm definitely clean up your backyard before you raise the flag as well. I think it's one thing to say, oh, we're trans and gender diverse inclusive, come to this event. We have a, trans category for the competition, including male and female. But then if your system doesn't know how to handle that information, or if you're not accepting more diverse pronouns or prefixes, then they're going to feel excluded anyway. So, talk to the community, get the community involved, get the community who is willing to speak and do the work, like us, involved, to have a say and try and build inclusion from the core. And I think you really need to invest resources and money into it. And it'll end up being, like we said, it'll end up being cheaper work for you anyway. I can almost guarantee that. It's and there's nothing wrong with being really loud and proud with that allyship as well. I think sometimes businesses worry about buying the pink dollar, or they think that they don't want to be putting the flag everywhere. But I think if you just trickle it out slowly and then see what your community says, it might speak wonders about what your community thinks. Maybe they aren't inclusive, and maybe there's a change that needs to happen there. There might be a lot that's not said, and negative feedback does happen as well. It's kind of part of the game. I think that as a member of the LGBT community, I'm kind of very, very accustomed to trying to do my best to support as many oppressed groups as possible, not just the LGBT community, the trans and gender diverse community, people of colour, people living with disability, just so that I've got all my bases covered. And I'm very used to someone else coming along and saying, hey, I feel excluded because of this. And you just have to take that feedback and take it on and try and include them in the next one. It doesn't sort of end at any point, I think. And then eventually it just becomes natural. But yeah, I don't know if I could sum that up. So get the community involved and clean up your backyard.
I love that quote. That's clean up your backyard. Yep, it's really pertinent, I think, and a great message that I might pinch from you and use with some of the clubs that I talk to, because I think that's a great way to sum it up. And I guess my next question then would be following on from that. As someone who's LGBTIQ, looking and wanting to engage with sport and perhaps haven't done so before, or did and had a really rotten experience, what would your advice to them be?
There's a lot of really great LGBTQ clubs and sports, like climbing Cuties. I think a lot of them exist within these sort of younger sports, like I think roller derby, for example. But even if you find one space, and even if you don't want to become a professional rock climber or a professional roller derby player, I think just have a go, and then you might start seeing yourself as a sporty person or an active person. That might be a really good stepping stone into the type of sport that you enjoy, which I've seen a lot with the people that come along to our events. We run events, and then we also have alternative activities happening at the same time sometimes. So we'll have a larger event at the gym, but we'll also have a craft station so people can come along without the pressure to climb, so they can come and socialise. Because a lot of queer spaces, revolve around partying and drinking, and I think sports offers a refuge for that. So yeah, just have a go, find someone to connect with. We're all really friendly, I'm sure you know, and then that could be your sort of pathway into other sports as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Riley. That's been such a useful conversation, and certainly really topical for me at the moment in the discussions I'm having. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. To everybody listening in, as usual, this will go on YouTube with captions, hopefully by the end of tonight or early tomorrow morning. And so if you want to share this around your networks, if you've got people that you think could benefit from the conversation, please do so. I do want to say thank you to all of you who have signed up to the Inclusive Leadership course. After hounding everybody on LinkedIn, I did fill that course, and they're about to start, well, some of them have already started their way through the content. So I'm really keen to see how they progress, and I might get a couple of those participants on one of these LinkedIn Lives in the future, and we might share some of the discussions that we've been having. Continue doing the amazing work that you're doing, Riley. And please, if you're interested in supporting Riley, climbing Cuties, or the other thing we didn't get to talk about was Kinfox. It's Kinfox, isn't it? Did you want to, you have got a couple of minutes, did you want to just explain what that is? Because I think a lot of the listeners it might be something that they could sign up for.
Yeah, I mean, it's started as a bit of a network, so with a few other friends who work in this space, and we just wanted to create a space online for people who are interested in doing D&I work to be able to connect and share ideas, because I think we're still working really siloed spaces. There's groups in sport and groups in the higher education sector, and we don't really talk to each other. We have so much to learn and share. So there's a Kinfox Network on LinkedIn, and then hopefully more opportunities and more fun things coming up in the next year. But yeah, we'll start with the network and see where that goes.
Yeah, wonderful. So people can find that on LinkedIn, I believe, as a LinkedIn group.
Yep.
Like jump on and check that out. Now, I just wanted to end, because it is NAIDOC week, I think yesterday morning, the primary school that my kids went to sent out a note about Remembrance Day. That was an activity that they were doing for Remembrance Day. And I shot off a little quick email to the principal asking what they're doing for NAIDOC week. And within a couple of hours, and they responded and said, yeah, we're each classroom's doing some activities for it. And within a couple of hours, they'd sent out a post to the whole school community about the week and the value of celebrating NAIDOC week and some of the messaging around it. And I think if you've got involvement with a school or a sporting club or your workplace and you haven't seen anything around this week, then now's probably a good time to raise that conversation. We know that this is not a conversation we should be having in just 1 week of the year, but it's a great kind of way to get in and start conversations happening if perhaps they haven't been happening. So please do what you can, act as an ally, read the Uluru Statement if you haven't already, and see what role you can play in promoting and advocating for that. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I'll catch you again next week with another guest, and please continue to send me in suggestions for topics and all guests. They're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Bree.